Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, my name is Hwang. I live in San Diego, California, the United States, and today is May 4th, 2020. As we all know that the Covid-19 is still raging around the world. The world that has just passed a 250,000 mark yesterday, and the infection is over 3.6 million people. There are new developments in that the UK is coming up with 190,000 infections, catching up pretty much close to Spain and Italy, and probably would soon overtake them in both the infections and deaths. Russia is also coming up with 145,000 infections and 18,000 deaths. These are new ones. And Brazil is coming up with 107,000 infections with 45,000 deaths. Now it looks like the G7, and if you want to add Russia as G7 plus 1, these are the 7 most developed economies in the Western world, including United States. These are the ones that are most affected with the most deaths. It is ironic that these are the 7 countries that has the most advanced economies, most stable democracies, and the most advanced technologies in almost every sphere. America, with 1.2 million and more infections, with close to 70,000 deaths, is the highest single country in the world. It is unfathomable that this should happen to America. I call it a perfect storm, or the first perfect storm. I'll explain it later. The people are asking one question: are we facing the end time? The end time for the world had always been a topic of much intrigue, curiosity, and speculation, even among the secular people. They are asking questions on the sustainability of the earth and even the sustainability of the universe. In Christian eschatology, which means the study of end times, these are the ones that is very much clear in the scriptures. It is in the Olivet Discourse in the New Testament of Matthew 26, Mark 13, and Luke 21. It was also in the Old Testament prophecy of Daniel, Jeremiah, Zechariah, Zephaniah, and on and on. Also in the New Testament prophecy of all in the book of Revelation. And we also see that there's a tremendous human efforts to mitigate the virus COVID-19. There's an operation called Operation Warp Speed, which is pretty much the equivalent of Manhattan Project during the Second World War to find a vaccine for the virus. But most are pretty much certain that it will come in due time, maybe 6 months, maybe 1 year, maybe even longer. So the pandemic was mentioned in the Olivet Discourse. It was also mentioned in the Revelations, the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And let me just read to you on Revelation chapter 6. As I watched as the Lamb opened the first of the 7 seals, then I heard one of the 4 living creatures say in a voice like thunder, "Come." I looked, and there before me was a white horse. Its rider held a bow, and he was given a crown, and he held a bow, and was given a crown, and he rode out as a conqueror bent on conquest. When the Lamb opened the 2nd seal, I heard the 2nd living creature say, "Come." Then another horse came out, a fiery red one. Its rider was given power to take peace from earth and make people kill each other. To him was given a large sword. When the Lamb opened the 3rd seal, I heard the 3rd living creature say, "Come." I looked, and there before me was a black horse. Its rider was holding a pair of scales in his hand. Then I heard what sounded like a voice among the 4 living creatures saying, 2 pounds of wheat for a day's wages, and 6 pounds of barley for a day's wages. Do not damage the oil and the wine. And when the Lamb opened the 4th seal, I heard the voice in the 4th living creature say, "Come." I looked, and there before me was a pale horse. Its rider was named Death, and Hades was following close behind him. They were given power over 1/4 of the earth to kill by sword, famine, plague, and by the wild beasts of the earth. So pestilence or plague is mentioned over there in the 4th horseman of the apocalypse. Now, as we go through this COVID-19, we are asking questions is, what are the dimensions of its impact? Number one, we look at public health, that this is one virus that is highly transmissible. It is 10 times higher than the flu, and the fatality rate, even though it's much lower, is still very consequential. Now, we have heard earlier that pretty much the people who died due to COVID-19 was the old people with underlying medical problems. But we are seeing more and more that there are instances of the younger people who are affected. The economic impact has been tremendous. Over 30 million people had filed for unemployment last week, and even though that the US federal government had pumped $2.2 trillion to help the American people to face this COVID-19, it seems that this money will soon run out. The federal government has gone through 3 times to ask the Congress to pass new bills, and it looks like this is getting to be pretty desperate. For one thing is that American government do not have the money. It's basically on credit card. We also see that the mental health of our American people is probably driven to the brink. We just read the news of an ER doctor in New York, a very pretty young doctor that has been working over 12 hours a day treating the patients, and finally she come to the mental burden of either feeling sorry, feeling guilty, of a bunch of negative emotions that she was going through, and she took her own life. We also heard of a Chinese American young lady who took a taxi to the bridge in New York and jumped from it. It could be again from tremendous psychological and mental health pressure. We also see that there are socio-political impact, in that there are protests right now all across America, and a lot of them are aligned with certain ideologies and in support of certain politicians, and the worldviews and their views are interestingly very different from the majority of the people. but very vocal. We just read the news that in San Diego, in Santee, that a person was dressed up in the KKK hood, trying to express his ideology, and their common call is for the civil liberties and away from what they considered the tyranny of the government to tell them what to do. We also see that the supply chain could be affected, that not only in the products around the world that was moving from here and US, the Western world, and Asia, especially China as the capital of the manufacturing, but also the effects is also on the food chain. It's not necessary that America is running out of food, but due to the fact that almost 20 of the of the meat processing plants were closed down, that due to some employees died, and the meat could not be processed, and this would cause a lot of those animals that were supposed to be sent to these plants had to be stalled, and this would cause a tremendous disruption in the supply chain. So President Trump ordered the food factories to be open. So it's not necessary of a lack of the products or the foods, but it is in the supply chain, in the process that is being disrupted. We also see that this has seriously impacted the international relations. There are many voices to accuse or blame the country of China, where this COVID-19, as we all know, originated in Wuhan. But there are a lot of speculations of the whole process and the whole truth about the process, and the Chinese government's efforts in covering up or misleading. So these are causing a lot of tensions internationally, even though it might not amount to a war, but the rhetoric is not very helpful. And we also see that it has impact on the class, race, and gender. Most of the victims in COVID-19 in America are minorities, because the minorities, especially African Americans and Latino Americans, are probably on the lower rung of the ladder, in the economic ladder, and they are suffered disproportionately higher. So the dimensions is vast, it's all over the places, and the milieu of these end times is also could be divided into two. One is inside the church, and the other one is outside the church. So inside the church, we could see that number one is in the end times, the Bible was telling us that there will be a time of apostasy. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 verse 3 and 4 says that, "Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come except there coming a falling away first, that the man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition." So the son of perdition would be the Antichrist. Now, interesting enough, one of the most famous sociologists, Arnold Toynbee, has quite some time ago, in commenting the socio-political nature of the world, he was basically predicting of a culture of deifying of a new Caesar, that somebody will rise up to take the place of God of and the Antichrist, and also try to replace Christ. So that is Antichrist. And in the church there will be also a lot of false prophets that that create false miracles and to deceive people. Also, there will be persecution of Christians around the world. So these are the signs of the end times in the in preparing for that. However, the good news is that there will be also angels preaching the everlasting gospel. So the gospel will reach out to all corners of the world, that the whole world would have a chance to make a decision either for Christ or to reject him. Outside the church, we read from the scriptures that there will be probably one world government with one world religion, and the idolatry of the Antichrist because of the miracles that he performed, and also in the political skills and his military supremacy. Now, there's also a prediction of a mass in a biblical proportion. In Zechariah chapter 13 verse 8 and 9 it says that, "And it shall come to pass that in all the land, says the Lord, 2 parts thereof therein shall be cut off and die, but the third shall be left therein." So there will be a lot of people who would lose their life. As we saw that in the apocalypse, in the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, it specifically mentioned the Antichrist, and it mentions about the plague, hunger, famine, and also wild beasts. We have no idea what that means on the wild beasts, but suffice to probably say that there is a disruption of the current way of containing the habitations of the humanity and the wild beasts. The wild beasts are basically in the jungle somewhere that lives upon its own ecosystem. But should it be that there would be a kind of blurring of the boundaries where the humans go into the jungles because of the famine, because of war, because of the plagues, and then the wild beasts would be threatened, and there's a contesting of the territory, and the wild beasts would become very harmful to humanity. Now, however, there is a judgment that we talk about, and we also talk about that these are fall within God's economy, that God knew all about these things. The Zephaniah 1:17 was that God says that I will bring distress upon man, that they shall walk like blind men, because they have sinned against the Lord, and their blood shall be poured out as dust, and their flesh as the dung. However, God is not only pronounced judgment, it is also has a plan for restoration. In Isaiah 46:11 it says that, "From the east I summoned a bird of prey, from a far off land, a man to fulfill my purpose, what I have said that I will bring about, what I have planned that I will do." And God is calling people to himself. In Deuteronomy chapter 4, 27 to 30 it says, 29 it says, "But if from thence thou shalt seek the Lord thy God, thou shalt find him, if you seek him with all your heart and with all your soul. And when you are in tribulation, and all these things are come upon thee, even in the later days, if you turn to the Lord thy God, you will be obedient unto his voice." Now let me turn to what I said earlier about the perfect storm in America. As we know that America is number one in both the infections and the death toll. This is what I would call a perfect storm, in that there are several dimensions and reasons and factors to it. Number one was the socio-political landscape. In January, there was still an impeachment of President Trump in the Senate, and a hyper-partisanship and divide between the Republican Party and the Democrat Party. So a lot of attentions and energy and resources had been diverted towards that. The second one is that the CDC and health treatment facility are totally lacking. There's a lack of the testing kits, and the testing kits that was developed by CDC was faulty. There was no command and control even early on, and the face masks never come into the recommendation. It was until the death toll in New York was so high that it was recommended and later on being made mandatory. Also, we see that the leader of United States, President Trump, was in a way probably downplaying the threat of the pandemic. Now, he himself as a novice probably would not have any idea of what this means, this threat means. However, the report has now shown that there has been at least 6 warnings from the intelligence community as early as January 6th, and he either did not read those briefs, or he did not fully understand it, or he did not follow it. So even though he banned travel from China on January 31st, he did not do anything to even check the temperature of the people coming through from Europe. The Europeans, tourists and travelers that came from Europe was over 2 million in the month of February, and these people were not checked in any way. So enough things had happened on that front. That's why New York, with its international airports of JFK, EWR, and LaGuardia, had been accepting all these people from Europe without testing at all. And then there were 3 major events in Mardi Gras in Louisiana, the spring break in Florida, and LA Marathon, also that scientific conference in Boston that has a huge gatherings among people. The state and federal government coordination is also very poor, in that there's no one national policy of trying to get the resources. The other factor is probably American characteristics of freedom loving and civil liberties. So the people are not very happy just to follow the rules from the governments. Now, there are some external factors, like China probably misleading with the situation and the numbers of infections over there. As we know that when the local authorities in China did not report the first infections, they were sacked later on by the central government because they do not want to be the ones who report the bad news. And WHO is also following along by misleading numbers. So there are a lot of external factors. So all this created the perfect storm that caused so many people to die in America. Now, I think there might be a second perfect storm that is on the horizon. And the one America today is dying every 44 seconds. The new infections and death rates are at a plateau. It's probably around 30,000 new infections and 2,000 deaths each day. Now this is the result of the first perfect storm. The second perfect storm would be all business opening up right now. Now as we know that President Trump would have wanted it, except he has no authority to make it happen. If there's no difference between essential and non-essential businesses, this is what will happen. Secondly is that there's no more social distancing. The guideline expires on April 30th without renewal. So basically there's a giving over of the federal responsibility towards the state responsibility, which is correct in the American federalism system. However, there are a lot of things that cannot be done on the state level alone. There must be a national coordination, and that is lacking. There's no face mask right now that is mandatory all over the places. As we see that most of the supporters of President Trump generally do not wear one, especially when we see them exercising their First Amendment rights to protest. President Trump never wear one. Even the other day, Vice President Mike Pence didn't wear one in a Mayo Clinic, where it was the guideline and it was the rule. He did not want to upset his boss. He later regretted it, but that sends a bad signal. The fourth one is that without the whole package of testing, these things could be part of a perfect storm. It's more than a single item in the package of testing. 200,000 tests are conducted each day now, but there are some experts who contend that 500,000 are needed. And there's no effective tracing of those who are infected to quarantine. It's only pretty much recommended. Now, the Asian countries pretty much has employed the app technology to be able to trace them and to quarantine them, but because it's much more draconian and also probably much more an invasion of privacy that Americans are not used to. Point number 6 is that if America continue to waste the precious time and resources to blame other countries and world agencies for which America could do nothing about right now. It could be nice rhetoric to appeal to their group of supporters, but this is not going to be helpful in combating the pandemic as it is today. And if America continue to fuel the divide in American politics to endorse the hate group of the white nationalists and conspiracy theories. So these are the things that I have deep concerns in my heart, that there could be a second storm on the horizon. Hopefully it does not. But coming to the questions of whether we are at the end times, most people are saying that we are not. For the reason is that the deaths toll is not that high yet compared to the pandemic of 1918, where between 25 million to 50 million people died and 675,000 Americans died. However, this pandemic is not over. This pandemic is only in China almost 3 months ago. It was done in China after 76 days of lockdown. Now it is raging at its highest in America with the death toll we have today. Now, I believe probably in the next month or two, it will hit its peak and start to go down with sufficient mitigation and containment efforts by all the people. However, there is still a risk that it goes to different parts of the world, especially India, Brazil, and Indonesia, and those countries with much more density in the population and also with less medical facilities. So these are the things that are still unknown. The other thing is that the pandemic might not be a one-time event. It could come back. Actually, Dr. Fauci was says that he is almost absolutely certain that it will come back again in the fall. Because as we look into the other pandemics, it usually does not come in one season alone. It comes back seasons after seasons. Even the Black Death in Europe, it lasts centuries. It goes in and out almost like every 10 years. So that's a long-term horizon as far as the time frame is concerned. So we do not know, but we just need to be aware that our God is good, that He calls us to Himself. For all these things are happening under His economy and His plan, that He will eventually bring this to the achievement of His own purposes. And when we trust our heart in Him and act prudently to protect and preserve ourselves and our loved ones, let's hope for a better day when we all come out healthy and be able to smile again. Thank you.